Good afternoon. So I guess I don't need any references for realtors quite yet. Thank you for showing up today. Thank you for showing up today. There's an old Woody Allen quote that said that 80% of success is showing up. There's another old quote that said that showing up is half the battle. I hope that by showing up for you in this campaign, showing up for you today, and showing up for a lifetime of service gets me somewhere between half and 80% on November 2nd. Showing up is something that I learned growing up in West St. Petersburg. Growing up as a member of my 7-member family, I was the 5th of 5 children, and I learned from my family, you don't sit on the sidelines when there's community in need. When there's a tragedy among friends, you show up. It's this thought process that drove our family. My parents were active in the Sertoma Club, active in the church, and active at All Children's Hospital. Every one of my siblings is still active today. Whether it's neighborhood association, churches, schools, no one in my family sits on the sidelines when there's a neighbor in need. I found my call to public service. I was active in local organizations and started to develop my leadership skills there. I volunteered for Representative Lars Hafner's campaign, and I was hooked on politics. I've been active in our community my entire life. Whether it's the Salvation Army, All Children's Hospital, the Exchange Club, the USF Alumni Association, or my old personal favorite, Leah's Dream, where we got a good group of people together to raise money to build a handicap-accessible playground at Tyrone Elementary. This connection to my native St. Petersburg and our show-up mentality is what first drove me to run for office in 2000. I was frustrated by Tallahassee and what they were doing to our teachers and students. I dove into our campaign, and even though we were outspent 2-1, and I was running against a sitting elected official, we were victorious. In 2006, I wanted to have a bigger impact, so I ran for the state senate. A time when a lot of people said, what are you doing running for that seat? You could stay in the House in a seat, easy seat. Again, we were outspent. It's been mentioned by millions. And our campaign didn't cost $6 million. Their campaign cost $6 million. And we were victorious. When my community wanted someone to show up to help our schools, I went to Tallahassee and I passed legislation to improve the conditions and pay and benefits for our best and brightest teachers. I wanted to keep the teachers in the classroom and tackle the teacher shortage. My opponent voted against sending help to save 29,000 teaching jobs in Florida and has done very little to help K-12 schools in Washington. When my community wanted someone to show up to look out for seniors, I went to the Capitol and I passed 3 strikes, making sure those who abuse our seniors pay the penalties. When my community cried out for healthcare assistance, I showed up and worked for better availability for nurses, prescription drug coverage, Alzheimer's services, cancer research, and community services like adult daycare, congregate dining, and Meals on Wheels. My opponent voted not to forward the Social Security report asked for by President Bush and voted against closing the donut hole for those on Medicare. When my community said it was time to end discrimination, I went to the Capitol and I filed legislation that was heard on the floor of the Senate for the first time in over 30 years, and I had legislation heard to end discrimination that would have united unwanted children with loving families. My opponent's votes continued discrimination against those who want to serve their country. When the Azalea community wanted to have someone show up when their neighborhood was contaminated by a migrating plume, I showed up and went to bat for them. I took on Raytheon and the bureaucracy of the DEP. We got the mess started to be cleaned up, and we passed legislation out of the Senate to make sure that neighborhoods never have to go through this again. My opponent remained silent. He didn't come to a neighborhood meeting. He didn't meet with our local leaders. He didn't send a staffer. He remained silent, except for taking over $100,000 in campaign money from Raytheon execs. When my community asked for someone to show up and demonstrate fiscal responsibility, I reduced my own salary. I cut my budget. And in fact, my legislative office has sent over $15,000 back to the state treasury over the last 15 months. My opponent's office budget is now over $1 million, and he's voted for as many or more pay raises than any member of Congress. In fact, after one vote, calling it the only honest vote. When my community looked for ethical representation, I showed up and sponsored legislation to sever the ties between politicians and those shadowy 527 groups that spent all the money in the 2006 race. I got the rules changed to end fundraising during all sessions and look for real campaign finance reform. My opponent earmarked millions and millions of dollars for entities that employed multiple members of his family, including $45 million for earmarks for his daughter-in-law lobbyist. And and the incumbent drives a luxury vehicle paid for with lobbyist campaign contributions. He also supported spending $3 billion on an alternative engine that the Secretary of Defense says he doesn't want and doesn't need. Anyone who thinks that the 40-year incumbent is going to lead the way on reducing frivolous defense spending probably would still think it's okay to have Bernie Madoff look after pensions. When my community looked for help with military and veterans, I showed up and passed legislation to prohibit insurance companies from penalizing our servicemen when they serve out of the country. I passed legislation this year to free up over $300,000 of private donations for our National Guard families who are suffering economically when their loved one is away. Money that was tied up by federal red tape. My opponent voted against the new GI Bill, voted against the military pay raise, and against minimum respirators for our servicemen. When my community is looking for jobs, I showed up to save and create Florida jobs, cutting taxes and fees on small businesses to the tune of $1.7 billion this year. My opponent had the chance to have input on the big jobs bill in Washington recently. He just didn't show up. And when our community needs funds for local priorities, I showed up and worked to bring home money for highway project, local parks, $9 million building at USF, millions for all children's, USF, St. Pete College, our local K-12, the Holocaust Museum, and beach renourishment. My opponent became so prolific at earmarks, at questionable spending on earmarks, that it led to the only thing that Republicans and Democrats have agreed on this year: no more earmarks. Speaking of earmarks, during his time as chairman of the Appropriations Committee, earmark requests went up 141%. After his chairmanship, they were reduced in half. When my community voted for term limits, I went to Tallahassee and defended their vote by not allowing the legislature to repeal that measure. My opponent said he supported term limits. Then he said he would abide by the term limits even after the courts threw them out. And then he changed his mind when he learned he may be in line for a powerful chairmanship. Ladies and gentlemen, I have passed substantial legislation on health care, consumer safety, education, and I have put forth substantial proposals during my time in office. I'm in our community every single day, and I'm in touch with those on the front lines. There's a difference between working quietly and remaining silent. We're in difficult times here in our community, and the constituents deserve to have a representative who will not only show up, but show up with fresh ideas and a love of public service. This is not the time for complacency. I believe that 40 years is long enough. I've been very proud to show up for you and our community in our capital. And I have faith in America and our community. I believe that we will soar again. But I don't see how we get there with the same old faces making the same old deals in the same old back rooms. I believe that when we get people together, like those in this room, for a common purpose and common goals, we can succeed. Because I believe that when we work together, when we stand together, and when we fight together, come November, we will win together. Thank you for allowing me to be here. Let me thank you for showing up today. I really appreciate it, because it shows you're involved in your community. Now, I just want to reiterate one point. You guys are pros. You know politics better than anybody else in the area. And you see the candidates do it all the time. I'm going to wait for that seat because it's going to be a better district. It's going to be a better time for me. It's going to be a better opportunity for me. I have never done that. I have never done that. I ran for my first seat when the party said, don't run. We've got a better candidate. I did it in 06 when they said, don't run. You can't win that seat. And I'm doing it today. I am willing to put my political career on the line. I'm willing to risk it because I believe it's that important. We need someone who's going to fight to create jobs, to improve schools, and make our community a little bit better place to live. I'm asking you to join me. I'm asking you to show up for me on November 2nd and elect me your next congressman. Thank you for your time today. God bless you.